on your camera.
I'm going to turn it over to Brian Griffith to moderate this session. He and his staff have put together a procedure. Please come on in. The only thing I will start with is that, as you will hear from Brian, we have 40 people who would like to speak in 60 minutes. Therefore, for the most part, the task force is here to hear public comments, not to give them. So I am going to ask the indulgence of my fellow task force members to try not to respond. I'm not going to make a rule that we will not respond, but I think our goal here should be to listen, certainly more than we speak. Brian, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I am, Madam Chair. Thank you. There are actually 41 respondents to the request to have a time before the task force being respectful. Pretty easy to do the math. We need to keep it down to a very fast minute or so. Like they're doing in the sports arena these days, the fastest 60 seconds in football, we're going to have the fastest 60 seconds in ecosystem restoration. Our first three presenters are Karen Gotro, Denise Reed, and Les Evanchik. I apologize for the pronunciation if I get it wrong. Karen?
Thank you, Brian.
I'm Karen Gotro. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Nature Conservancy for the Gulf of Mexico. We certainly appreciate you being here today to listen to us. I'd like to just offer 3 things for the task force. First, we encourage you to develop a comprehensive vision and strategy for restoration of the Gulf. While TNC is very engaged and supportive of restoration of Louisiana's coastal wetlands, we're also very aware that these wetlands are an important component of the entire ecosystem. And the entire ecosystem is in need of restoration and conservation efforts, and we believe that we can accomplish more together than acting individually per state. We also encourage that restoration efforts not be limited to oil spill impacts. The Gulf has been in a degraded condition for quite a while, much of that as a result of all the resources it has provided for its nation and state. And we believe it's very much appropriate to start focusing on this area as a priority and make the investments that will allow us to continue to have this resource for generations to come. And also, this strategy needs to be developed at a bottom-up approach or with local expertise and buy-in so that we have a strategy that people endorse and are willing to implement. And TNC stands ready to work with our partners in all of the Gulf states to help build a strategy that will put the Gulf on a more resilient path to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Dr. Denise Reed.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming back again, many of you. My name is Denise Reed. I'm at the University of New Orleans. I'm also a coastal resident and have been for 25 years. I have 2 points that I could make long, but I'll try and make them short. One is about process, and the other one is about what I think should be in the strategy. I've worked on a number of plans for coastal Louisiana, many of those probably that Brian's team has been reviewing. And I think we have to learn and think about what's different this time. And the key thing there is think about what's going to be different this time. If we're just rearranging those jigsaw puzzle pieces, then we will get some kind of dysfunctional picture. We really have to think about what we need and how we can move this forward. And so I really urge you to think about processes that can engage us, your people and folks like me that have worked on these processes for a long time, in some kind of dialogue about how we can make this different. Not just me standing at the microphone and you listening, or a listening session, but actually rolling up our sleeves and working together. This is going to be difficult, and we all have to work together on this, and you need the best people you can helping you with this. And many of us will come to the table, whether there is funding or not. The second one is about what needs to be in the strategy. This needs to be different. We've got enough plans, you all know that, and I will take my share of the blame for many of those plans. But some of them are different, and they point to the future. That has to be a key element of this. This one needs to be different. This is the one that makes a difference. That's why I've been here all day, because I think this could be the one that makes a difference. And you all being here and coming to these meetings is one of the things that gives me some hope that this one might be different. So what we have to do is think about the big things, not the small, easy things that have probably been done before. The Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection and Restoration Act has been spending about $50 million a year for 20 years on coastal Louisiana. That's $1 billion. And yet we still have the map that Garrett showed this morning. The small things will not make a difference. Do the big things. Lay out a path for the big things. Take what Mr. Salt said this morning about the Corps and Army wanting to think differently about how they do things in the 21st century and use that as a cornerstone. That might not lead to an action that you can see on the ground next year or the year after. But if we can get there in 15 years about doing something different, there has to be a year one. And 2011 has to be year one of the big thing that's going to make a difference in this system. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Denise.
Les Everchek, a retired engineer and formerly a commercial and sports fisherman as well, resident of the French Quarter. First, all this talk about bottom-up is absurd when you only can have 1 minute to speak. Second, seafood. The seafood is not proven safe in the talk that was given. It mentioned oil fish, the oil shrimp was put aside. Where did test results on those oil shrimp? There's no way to find out where those tests were made and when those tests were made. They're not posted anywhere. Corexit, already proven dangerous. Terry Hazen, a consultant to the government and to BP, said before the oil spill that after the Amoco Cadiz spill, where dispersion was not used, the shoreline recovered in 5 years. 20 years after, the shoreline had not recovered where dispersant was used. You all need to do some investigating yourself and not rely on whoever's feeding you this bunch of BS that's being echoed here. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time and for being here. We greatly appreciate it. I'm Casey Calloway. I'm the director of Mobile Baykeeper. We have over 4,000 members and work statewide and across the Gulf Coast and have been doing so for 14 years. My biggest issue that I want to talk to you about today. One is we really see great places where you've got citizen involvement. You've got a great local government committee. It looks like you have a great NEJAC, the Environmental Justice Committee. What we don't see, though, is a strong, formalized place for citizens to be actively involved. And that is something that we want to see from you, and we raise our hands and sign up, and we'll put whatever we got to do, whatever drive time we've got to do to be there. We feel it's very important. There are places where that exists through the Gulf of Mexico program, or other places that's an easy fit-in mechanism, but it is imperative that there's a formalized citizen involvement process. The second thing that I want to talk about is in terms of restoration and being an Alabama state. One of the things that we're hearing is a very big fear from our legislators over how, quote unquote, the money's going to get divided. I know y'all are tired of hearing where's the money, but it's not going to end. And what I really strongly request that you do, that under all of the leadership is how it happens, is that the funds are equitably distributed around the state for environmental restoration, but also with a caveat that it's based on economic impact. Alabama has seen a $3 billion impact because of tourism. We've lost 1 million tourists to our state just last year that we know, and that is going to make a major hit on our economy. The two coastal counties, 58 miles of beachfront property actually impacts more than 30% of the budget of the state of Alabama. But in that 58 miles of beachfront, there are 600 miles of tidal shoreline. And that tidal shoreline has great need for restoration. So there are phenomenal and significant projects that we need across the Gulf, and we hope that you find a great equitable way to make sure that all of the states are getting the restoration dollars that they need. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Andy Thompson.
Hi, my name is Andy Thompson, welcome to New Orleans, and I'm very excited to be here today because I have some really wonderful news. On April 18th to the 21st, here in New Orleans at the Hilton Riverside, we'll be underneath the United States Leadership Forum, the United States Leadership Summit, which is going to be a solution summit addressing the truths and acknowledging the truths of the economic, environmental, and health issues facing the Gulf, but also providing solutions as we go forward. I need the help of everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience to get all 5 states involved. We've got Senator Bob Graham is keynote speaker, co-chair of the Oil Spill Commission, and a lot of other exciting things going on. But 25% of all the funds raised, which is $500 to $62,500 per entry, of exhibition will go directly to nonprofits who have been assisting in this oil spill since day one, and we'll spread it over the organizations. It will be given away on the hour, every hour over the summit. So it's www.leadershipforum.us, and I look forward to getting everyone's help.
Thank you. Dr. Linda Hooper-Wick. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir, you did. Hi, I'm Linda Hooper-Bowie. I'm from LSU, and I'm a scientist. I work in the marsh, and I study insects. I'm an entomologist, and you might be wondering what insects have anything to do with an oil spill, but they are food for frogs, fish, and birds.
Food for frogs, fish, and birds. And the fish that you consume at my Anderson's right up the street, they're munching on all kinds of things that are in the marsh. If you go out to the marsh, and I'd invite every one of the commission members today to take a trip down to Lower Plaquemines Parish and find yourself in Bay Jimmy and Bay Bash and some of the other areas that are heavily oiled. And I want you to go out there, and even though it's winter, we actually are having a warm winter. And if you go out to the marsh even today, almost 10 months after, or actually more than 10 months after the spill, it is silent. So, and I will tell you that the marsh is not supposed to be silent. The marsh is supposed to be filled with dragonflies and grasshoppers and these little seed bugs that feed on the tips of the marsh grass. And the birds are supposed to be flitting around. And it is silent. It was silent all summer. It is silent this winter, and it's going to turn into a silent spring. And I wish I had good news for you to tell you that it's going to be better. And I don't know when it's going to be better, but I heard somebody talk about top-down and bottom-up regulation a little earlier. This bottom-up, these insects and spiders that are part of the food web, they are hugely important for that whole ecosystem. And I'm going to tell you, I don't have my data peer-reviewed in the literature yet. It's going to be out in 2 months. But I will tell you today that there is a signal, and that means that we are seeing an effect. And we are going to see this effect, and we don't know how long it's going to last. And so one of the things I would request from the commission is that you make my life a little bit easier by making the funding a little bit easier to get. Normally, I write about 2 to 3 grants a year, and I'm lucky if they get funded, okay? I've written about 8 grants. I'm fortunate that 6 of them have been funded and 1 is pending. But we have this promise of the $450 million that BP has promised us, and December 1st went by, and we still do not have a request for proposals out. And we are desperate to be able to get our work done and to be able to get some funding to paint you a picture of what is really happening in America's Gulf. It's not just Louisiana's Gulf or Florida's Gulf. It is America's Gulf, and I think our speakers this morning showed us that.
Thank you.
I represent a creative industry and R&D group in New Orleans, and we have several key clients such as the RAND Corporation, a large think tank from California, as well as their local affiliate here, which is the RAND, Gulf States Policy Institute, and the ICOM, International Engineering Company. The reason I'm speaking today is that this meeting has dealt primarily with ecological and ecological issues, and except for fisheries, there's been very little discussion of economic issues. I understand the importance of fisheries, but there are some major economic issues that we should be addressing as well. There are 5 of the largest corporations in the world. 3 of those 5 are very active in this region, primarily the oil and gas companies. Where are they in this discussion? If you take 3 of the 5 top corporations in the world, they accounted for about $1 trillion+ in sales in 2010. They should be major participants in this effort. They have the resources and the capability. Where are they? And I think there needs to be a process of reaching out to the major corporations that should be part of this discussion. Not just BP from the standpoint of penalties, but from a positive standpoint, participating as investors in this process.
Thank you. Kit Alexander.
I'd like to pass.
Ramjack. I'm sorry, did I jump over Jeffrey? I'm sorry.
Jeffrey Buchanan. I'm a Senior Domestic Policy Advisor with Oxfam America. I'll just be brief. Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished task force members. At Oxfam America, we've worked in the Gulf Coast for a number of years on organizing community organizations and trying to provide assistance in developing policy solutions. Two of our top priorities are within the mandate of this task force, looking at how do we do effective community participation in developing this restoration plan, and how can we maximize the economic and social benefits of the coastal restoration effort. I want to thank Madam Chair for her work in standing up a subcommittee of the National Environmental Justice Advocacy Commission. I think it's an important first step to give vulnerable communities a seat at the table in developing this whole idea, and I hope we can carry forward in that spirit moving forward. On the economic side, I was pleased to hear Vice Chair Graves mention the opportunity of this restoration plan to create tens of thousands of jobs, especially for vulnerable people and people who have been dislocated by the oil spill. The fishers and other folks are certainly positioned with proper assistance to find work in this effort. And I would encourage moving forward that the task force look to find solutions, perhaps to look into the federal government for some of those economic mission agencies that might not have a seat at the table to work to find solutions for the long-term plan, and even that we can take in the short and intermediate steps, specifically looking at ideas like prioritization and local contracting and local hiring, looking at setting aside portions of these possible Clean Water Act dollars for workforce development, and looking at what kinds of abilities can we do in supporting local firms and local entrepreneurs, find out how they can access these new markets in terms of restoration, especially for disadvantaged people and entrepreneurs. Excuse me.
My name is Ram Ramachandran. I am from St. George Parish, ex-councilman. Also serve as an advisor to OCS Policy Committee. What frustrates me is the efforts that have been put together by Army Corps of Engineers over the past 30 years I'm involved with. It's an exercise in futility. They have a 2050 scheme, but no funding, no authorization. But they talk. I met with the colonel so many times. To get back the point, when Congress acts on something, you cannot fault to the employees of the federal government. They execute the wish of the Congress. Now, to give you an example, Gary was involved in it, when Garrett was involved in it. We tried to pass the CARA through our senator. We never saw the light of the day. I represented 3,600 counties in the country in NACO. NACO supported that policy because we needed $6 to $8 billion a year in oil revenue from OCF. Is not a small sum. We lost 2,800 square miles of wetland in the last 80 years. That's about 2/3 the size of Rhode Island. That is the fire in the stomach of the politician. Where is it? We have the fire in the stomach to save our state. What happened to the politicians in Washington? What happened to the rest of the people? We should put their feet to the fire. Madam Secretary, I thank you for initiating it at the local level to get the feedback. I'm very passionate. By the way, I'm an engineer. I have a daytime job. This is my pastime. And having said that, why we are not doing this is very simple. It's an exercise by the academia to publish papers, get funding for the project. That's where it starts. They mean well, they don't know how to get it funded. That's where the key is. I understand federal and state politicians have a half-life period of 4 years. The project dies after 4 years. Half-life, 4 years.
I'm going to need you to wrap it up.
And I'm going to run out of time. Please put the feet to the fire, get this going.
Good afternoon, my name is Bethany Kraft, and I'm the director of the Alabama Coastal Foundation, and I'd like to thank all of y'all for the effort and time that you're putting in to create a better Gulf Coast for us here. Just two really quick comments about the strategy document that will ultimately be developed by y'all's teams, and also stakeholder input. One of the things that I'd like to make sure gets into the document is that the ecosystem services and economic value of restoration are really explained fully in the document. I think we all now understand that the quality of our economy is intrinsically linked to the quality of our environment, so much so that I'm surprised I haven't seen it on a bumper sticker or a t-shirt yet. But what does that really mean in terms of the Gulf Coast? Highlighting the importance
importance of environmental restoration as a key to economic recovery, I think is something that we would all benefit from in terms of planning for our own states and across the Gulf as a whole. Understanding what the return dollar on our investment in terms of ecosystem services is also something that will help us understand more fully the link between our economy and our environment and have it move beyond something that's just a slogan. Secondly, y'all will be finished hopefully with your task and have a great document. I know that we would all be heartbroken if it's not something that was able to be implemented by all of the states and by the stakeholders. So to that end, I would really love it if the task force could utilize your collective brain trust as you're developing this strategy and provide some guidelines and prioritization tools for the states and stakeholders to use to actually implement the priorities that are developed by this team as a whole. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Simone LaRose?
Yes. Madam Chair, task force members, in response to the deadly BP Deepwater Horizon explosion and subsequent crisis in the Gulf of Mexico, leaders in Washington and the entire nation appeared committed to make our coast whole again. The creation of this task force further illustrated that commitment. Thank you for your service. My name is Simone Laws. I'm the executive director of a local restoration advocacy organization called Restore or Retreat. For 10 years prior to this bill, we've been dedicated to looking at the Barataria and Terrebonne basins, the area in between the Chapalaya and Mississippi rivers experiencing the greatest land loss in the nation. We've been dedicated to aggressively pushing sustainable projects for that area. And it's in that capacity that we ask you to please don't recreate the wheel. The state has a very actionable strategy with a state master plan. We believe that's a solid document. It's moving forward. Also, with the significant amount of funding, we do support that the majority of those funds get dedicated to restoration, that each state has an equal and fair share, and that you use organizations like Restore Retreat and the many, many others dedicated, who have long been dedicated to serving this coast. We ask you to use those in that actionable strategy that was mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben Gordon.
My name is Ben Gordon. I'm with Pax Christi, the National Catholic Peace Organization, and I also put down LEAN, Louisiana Environmental Action Network. I can't speak for LEAN because I'm not on their board of directors or anything, but I'm just a dues-paying member, so I'm just speaking from that perspective. There was a lot of things that were mentioned earlier, so I won't go into that again. But just two things. Core exit was brought up a little bit this morning, but not much detail was gone into using core exit. I think that was a dangerous strategy, particularly now with the spraying, which is done, and I understand it's still being done as it comes to the surface. But also, there's something that's never been studied is pumping at a rapid rate core exit at the wellhead site where we leak was coming. You know, that was never examined. They did no studies on it, and they just went ahead and did it. The question is, why hadn't these things been studied? How did BP and government officials end up in the spot where they had to do something with no pre-thought? The other thing is, in the formation of the Gulf Ecosystem Restoration Task Force, I know it was created by executive order, but once again, it's folks who live with the consequences of the oil spill, like in Grand Isle and other areas along the Gulf Coast, listening in and handing in their problems to a large panel of government interests, and to some degree backed by business interests, listening to somehow I think when this was created by executive order, and I understand that's the way it was created by President Obama, somehow I would like to see more folks up there mixed with you folks who were from the areas that are being affected. I'm talking about fisher folk, people who live along the Gulf Coast, as well as some of the environmental organizations like LEAN, who have folks who have been fighting environmental issues for years. I would have liked to see them on that panel up there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maura Wood with the National Wildlife Federation. Thank you all so much for being here. I know the executive order charged y'all with a lot of things, but one of the things it charged you with is gathering together and the research that's out there and identifying research that is needed and gaps in knowledge that still need to be filled. Denise talked to you about thinking big and going big on restoration. We don't have time to waste. We also have a lot of cutting edge science, modeling, data collection that is coming out right now that will help us as you move to this next level to ensure that we're doing this from a very science-based platform. The other thing is that as this information, this new information is becoming available, and I'm sorry I don't know if you've already done this, but perhaps creating some kind of clearinghouse for the public and myself to keep track of that information, that exciting information that's coming out, and the exciting work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
My name is David Muth, also with the National Wildlife Federation here in Louisiana. And I'm not going to repeat a great deal of what you've already heard. You heard from Denise Reed and Karen Gautreaux and other speakers. I do want to emphasize to you that we all understand that you have been given no authority and no money. So what you've been given perhaps is a bully pulpit. And one of the things you need to do is to identify structural, legal, and systemic blockades to meaningful restoration. The Mississippi River is the key to how the northern Gulf Coast, the entire ecosystem functions, and the Corps of Engineers is responsible for the river. What has to come out of this group is a recommendation that the Corps' responsibilities, which are navigation and flood control, need to be changed. There needs to be a co-equal emphasis on restoration. And that's going to take Congress, that's going to take the administration, and I would hope that you would look very hard at that and other legal impediments to moving forward with real restoration, the kind that Denise talked about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mac McKenzie, hi. One of the things that I've been seeing a lot is a disconnect between government and the people and a lot of different levels. And one thing that we're concerned about is the disparity between independent testing of seafood, air, water, and what y'all, FPA, EPA, whatever is providing.
I've done seafood testing myself that have come back with numbers that I can't understand. And if nobody says dead baby dolphin today, I'm going to scream. So, dead baby dolphin. 73 of them as of Friday, I heard. And these dolphins, the mothers, were eating the sea nettles that were already shown to have oil in them. All of a sudden, they're aborting at alarming rates. They're mammals. We're mammals. I think we need to connect that. So I want more focus put on the people, and the citizens advisory councils like they have in Alaska absolutely needs to happen, because there's this disconnect that I don't think, even if y'all are the most honest in the world, it's not going to come across that way unless the people are involved and our concerns are being addressed. Thank you.
I have so much to say, but only a minute, so I just basically want to let you know that I'm from Texas and I'm here.
I still fail to understand how we're going to restore our ecosystem when we're not done cleaning up. There doesn't seem to be a very clear plan. The back bays in my area are very noxious. We got dead dolphins rolling up on shore. There are scientists coming out and taking samples of these dolphins, and they're leaving the carcasses on the beach. So I'm a little puzzled as how we're going to do this when we haven't really taken care of all the areas.
This is a comment session now. We're not going into question and answer.
And listen, let me just say, I said we would not have any hard and fast rule. The answer is really that they're not mutually exclusive. I don't think anybody is arguing that we should not be continuing the response. We had an earlier presentation by the Coast Guard who leads it, but we also need to look ahead, because in many ways the activities of what ultimately happened are reinforced if we know where we're going, and there are a lot of roadmaps out there, as we've heard. So it's not an either or, it's an and.
Elizabeth, go.
Yes.
Elizabeth Coe, Louisiana native. You know, the elephant in the room is the health effects that are happening right now to the people of the Gulf Coast. It's not been allowed to be discussed as a part of this restoration task force. Even though, how can you talk about truly assessing the damages and restoring the ecosystem if the health of the people is deteriorating? What does that mean? It means a lot of things. You had someone from the FDA here saying that he's never seen more rigorous testing of seafood. Well, the reality is the allowable levels of hydrocarbons for this disaster was raised, meaning that seafood is allowed to be more contaminated than previously to this disaster. So that was a flat-out lie. That was a lie. And you are federal officials supposed to be representing the people and the people's best interests. Well, people are going to have to speak up for their own interests because it's clear that as long as possible, you will ignore the elephant in the room, the health effects, while people grow more and more ill. Hundreds of people are showing elevated levels of these chemicals in their blood. People are still being exposed to the chemicals who live on the Gulf Coast. The oil isn't gone. There are allegations that core exit is still being used. I hear it from folks all the time. People who just live near the water are being tested positive for the chemicals. If this is a bottom-up process, then we demand that health effects be allowed to be discussed. Truly a bottom-up process. Because so far, we've been lectured to all morning, and we've been allowed 1 minute each in this so-called bottom-up process. I didn't get to question the Seafood and Marketing Board person who advocated that the seafood is so safe. I didn't get to ask a question of him. He didn't represent me. I didn't choose him to represent the issue of seafood safety. You should have had another viewpoint up there. If this is really a bottom-up process. Going forward, I would please, this is a sham process or it isn't. Either you allow us to discuss the health effects or you delegitimize your own process. Thank you.
Director Jackson, members of the task force, I appreciate the chance to speak here. I feel like Derek could probably do my presentation for me, but I'll go ahead and save him the trouble. As we are here today in the city that is here because of the river just down the road, we have to look at the challenges to restoration. We have to look as a member of the maritime community. I'm here to talk about the maritime industry, in fact that we have transit restrictions on the river right now. As the Corps has spoken up, they're willing to look at new ways. Challenges of funding. We have a task force, we have a trust fund, the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund has a $6 billion surplus in it as we sit here today. The important part for this is of the projects approved, one of them is beneficial use of dredge material. I have a 12-year-old, now 13-year-old son. His term for that is marsh recycling. It's a way to take the mud out of the river and put it into, or back into the marsh. Work on reproducing what Mother Nature used to do, as has been talked about by other scientists in the room. And of course, I'm a maritime guy, I'm not a scientist. But I do like the common sense approach here. As this trust fund is out there, we have a bill by Congressman Boussinet. We have a Senate bill by Senator Levin. There's also a website with great information, rampHMTF.org. there is an effort going on, and this is one of the ways that navigation gets involved. You won't see very many people here from navigation industry. They've got full day schedules. Maybe some will be here tonight. But I'd like to talk about the fact that maritime transportation is the safest, most environmentally friendly, and as Director Jackson knows, we have more EPA regulations coming up that in the future will make it even more so. One barge moves what 70 trucks move and 16 rail cars. We have to look at maintaining the river, the navigational importance. 1 in 7 jobs in Louisiana directly related to the river. Farmers in the Midwest are writing in about dredging these days and talking about the fact that being able to ship down the river is a 10 to 12 cent a bushel benefit to them that saves them and helps make them competitive in world markets. As we have a crisis on the Mississippi River, we have ports in South America taking business away from us as we speak. The Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund is the only way I see to help increase the Corps budget, which will allow the Corps to do more of what they're supposed to do. That trust fund has about $1.5 billion come into it a year, and every year about 600 to 800 million goes into the general treasury, where that money is reappropriated into other projects that we have no control or no accounting for what it's paying for. It's not paying for its intended purposes. And again, beneficial use is one of those. Thank you.
Hi, my name is White Hawk Bourne. I really hope to ask a question, and I'm told I need to make a statement. So correct me if I'm wrong. It's my understanding that once land is washed away for coastal erosion, that the landowner no longer has the rights to that land. It's now owned by the federal government. And assumably then the mineral rights to that land is also owned by the federal government. Is this correct?
Madam Chair, under state law, if property erodes, it actually becomes a state water body and would be in control of the state government. However, there is an opportunity for the property owner to file for a reclamation permit and carry out reclamation activities to take over, to reassume ownership of both the surface and subsurface rights.
So how readily accessible is that, and how does one go about finding that information?
The process by which to file a reclamation permit and to reclaim that property. The Department of Natural Resources for the state administers a program. If you want to contact me or my office, I'd be more than happy to help get you in touch with the right folks.
Hi, my name is Helena Davis. I'm from Bridge City, Louisiana. I had nothing to do with the oil spill, but in fact, I'm ill from it. I work 2 blocks from the Hillview Long Bridge. And here, my doctors are telling me I have to move away, get treatment and move away. I've lost my job. I haven't worked since May the 10th. I lost a job of 8.5 years. This is not on me. I'm fighting for disability. Where is the government help on getting people medical treatment like I need? I have to come out of pocket for that.
Well, we need treatment, and we need the government to come up with medical treatment. And for all the ones that's out there, and that's there, and swept everything under the rug with BP for all of these years, it's just like somebody else. If somebody mail a package with any kind of contaminants in the mail that hurt someone, they're handled. What happened to all of these ones sitting up in BP that was set up and swept everything under the rug and knew that they needed some type of safety going out there, and they can have safety. They need to be handled because that's murder, and this was all attempted murder cases on them.
Hello, thanks for the time. I'm Ann Rolfes. I'm the director of a nonprofit called the Louisiana Bucket Brigade. We work with people who live next to oil and gas pollution. And I've never met Ms. Davis, but I've talked to her on the phone a lot of times. We're getting a lot of calls like this about human health, and people are sick. And it's not in the title of your task force, but it needs to be in somebody's title. So to the extent that y'all have some power on that, please exercise it.
One comment, it's really disturbing to see, and I think it's really a recommendation, it's very disturbing to see NOAA and FDA really as a subset of the Seafood Promotional Board.
That's how that presentation was made. And I really respect the work of the Seafood Promotion Board, and I understand the quandary that we're all in. But the question that they propose always is, we're going to show that the seafood is safe. They don't say we're going to find out if it's safe. And so to have NOAA and FDA then presenting the results under that banner, I think really puts their truthfulness in doubt, and I think it casts doubt on the commission. So just a suggestion for the future. And then just 2 points on process, and I'm going to come and find you a bit later. I know y'all approved their process, but I have 2 recommendations. One is that there needs to be, in addition to this process, that provides for a submission of deeper plans. So, for example, I know that the Vietnamese community at Mary Queen of Vietnam in New Orleans East has written a white paper on subsistence fishermen and how they might need help more in this process. My organization with others could submit something about how to engage community members as samplers, and I think this 1-minute process really misses out on a lot of the expertise that we would all be happy to share. So add a process to submit deeper plans. And then secondly, there is a transparency question, I believe, on how y'all use these comments. There is a process laid out about how you gather them, and that's encouraging. But it would be nice to also see a companion exhibit on how you're going to use these comments. That was really the hook on the Oil Spill Commission hearing. There was a lot of information provided about health, and then that was boiled down to just a very few lines in their report. We appreciate y'all's time and work hard for us.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Daigle. I'm the coordinator for the Lower Mississippi River Sub-Basin Committee on Gulf Hypoxia, which is composed of the states and the Lower River working together under the National Hypoxia Action Plan. And in some previous discussions, some folks have proposed the idea of some portion of the BP funds being spent upriver to try to alleviate the hypoxia problem. And I think that deserves serious consideration. It's in line with what was said earlier about this is a long-standing ecological problem for the Gulf, and certainly in line with the President's directive to try to restore it to a condition better than it was before the spill. And if you're going to do that and try to address hypoxia, you can't avoid looking upriver. So I think there's a real case to be made for that, and certainly pragmatically, like a lot of other efforts that were federally funded, the hypoxia effort, given the current fiscal situation, doesn't see any funding prospect on the horizon at all. So this would be a welcome way to try to keep time from being lost in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, bonjour. Bienvenue à Louisiane. Welcome to Louisiana. I hope y'all pass a good time while y'all here. My name is Patty Whitney. I'm with VISCO, Volume Interfaith Shared Community Organizing. I do have a handout. I only have one because I'm a nonprofit and we do a lot with no money. So I'm going to hand it to Mr. Bryan, and I hope he can make copies to hand to you. A lot of it actually, or some of the data from the state of Louisiana, the Department of Natural Resources, that someone asked about this morning that they would like to see the data. I particularly encourage looking at page 3, which shows the amount of oil Louisiana gives to the nation and the amount of oil royalties Louisiana gives to the nation versus every other oil-producing state in the country. It's eye-opening. My statement essentially is, if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to keep getting what we have now, which is a destroyed coast. We are sick. The coast is sick. The Gulf is sick. The economy has problems. There are things that we need to fix, and sadly, or happily, I guess, I don't know, you guys have been charged with coming up with a plan for fixing it. And we're looking to you to do that. I would request, and I just think that there is the whole problem that has happened to us in the past is this insanity that we keep doing something and we expect to get a different result. We have to change how we do things along the coast. We have to change our value system. As long as the American dollar is the only measurement for restoration or things we should protect or things we should do, people, their lives, their communities, and their ecosystems are going to lose. As long as the dollar is the only measuring stick. We have to have a three-legged stool. One is commerce, because people do need jobs. I'm glad to have a job. I wish it paid more, but I'm glad to have it. Okay? We need a nice, clean, healthy environment that produces for everyone, not just a few. And we need communities that are sustainable, that are healthy, that are safe. For too long in the past, what's happened along the Gulf Coast is commerce, much as it's needed, is the 800-pound gorilla. And every state has a different 800-pound gorilla. But we all have them, and they're not in the room. Because they don't need to be. They hold all the power. They don't even have to show up and they hold the power. We need to change the value system, and if you guys can figure out a way to do that, to give people a voice, real people a real voice, we would certainly be happy to hear it. And we do need active participation by a citizens advisory board.
How you do? My name is Randy Mortell, and I'm a private landowner representative. And there's a couple things I want to talk about the process very quickly. I don't know how it is in Texas or Alabama or Florida, but 80% of the land in Louisiana is privately owned. So when you look at Garrett's slide that showed all the red, and they talk about from bottom up, you see all that red going from the bottom up. Well, that's mostly our property going away. You know, and so it's one thing I want everybody to be aware of, and what I'm recommending is, and we've been fighting this battle for the past 20 years in this state, is please engage the landowners. Do it early on in the process. Whatever recommendations y'all come out of, be sure to keep the landowners involved, because they can checkmate a project very quickly, because we still have private landowner rights in the state, and it's something that's very important that needs to be included in this. The second part of this is to, in the process, was assess what is currently being done. Well, we've done a lot, and if you'll notice on Garrett's thing, what's going to get done in 2012, you saw those little polygons and little marks and little stuff. Those are used, most of those things came out of the Quipper process. And what we've done is pick the low-hanging fruit for years now, for 20 years, and we've done these projects all over the state. What we need to do now is take a big picture approach, and we need to connect these dots. After Hurricane Katrina, the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation came up with something called multiple lines of defense. And what it is it's these east-west running lines that produce these speed bumps. So if we get hurricanes, oil spills, or anything else, they're running into land constantly before they keep going into the interior. So what we need to do is connect these dots and make these projects go east-west as we develop these multiple lines of defense. One last point is economy of scale. If you're going to build a project, build it big. If you're going to create marsh, build a big chunk of marsh. Because if you have to mobilize and demobilize and keep moving equipment around, it's going to cost you a lot of money. You can drive the cost down very quickly if you'll strategically locate these things. Thank you all very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the task force. My name is Henri Boulet, and I am a coastal resident from Lafourche Parish. And I'm the director of a community coalition called the Louisiana Highway 1 Coalition. As I'm sure most of you are aware of, LA1 plays a significant role in America's changing energy security as of today. A significant role in Louisiana's seafood industry and our tourism industry and our culture as we want to get to the coast. It's absolutely critical to my community's sustainability that LA1 be secured. I am here today to ask you to please incorporate a funding mechanism in your plans forward for critical infrastructure like LA1 that not only serves coastal communities but serves the entire nation. I have left copies with Brian of a NOAA analysis just released Friday, predicting that in less than 20 years, LA1 will be inundated with seawater 30 times a year as a result of climate change impacts and subsidence. That's a tremendous amount of economic activity at stake here. So again, on behalf of our community, I would ask that you be sure to incorporate a funding mechanism to address infrastructure as part of the larger plan for the Gulf Coast. Thank you very much for being here in New Orleans.
Good afternoon. I had the pleasure of being at your first meeting in Pensacola a few months ago. And I just want to say at the outset, I think it's impossible to defend the Constitution of the United States without defending the people that live in the United States. And the beaches are still contaminated, not been cleaned up. This handout that's here from the CDC is misleading at best to say that the levels that were determined are not a threat to human health is simply not accurate. There's data coming out from Ira Leifert, the scientist who was on the remote sensing team for the government, that the volatile compounds coming out of that wellhead in the Gulf came up in cloud formations, came down in the coast in precipitation, continues to do so. We're in the process of putting clinics down here so people get treated. But for the government agencies involved, and that's almost everyone, to continue to deny this and not to address the fundamental problem of cleaning up a situation which was rendered virtually unable to be addressed by the dispersant. There has to be something done. There has to be a level of reality faced here, and it would be greatly appreciated if all of you on this task force would do that for us. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Wayne Bourgeois. I'm the Executive Director for the North Lafourche Levee District. And I wanted to make one quick point concerning your task here. Ecosystem restoration. I just wanted to mention that the people who live in our delta are part of the ecosystem. And as important as it is for the things on the natural side to get the nutrients and things that they need to live and survive, people need to have protection. Basically, I'm speaking in terms of infrastructure, those things being levees for flood protection, roads, as already mentioned, for a means to get to their livelihood. So we're hoping that a portion of this, along with a whole lot of coastal restoration, could be dedicated towards the infrastructure that was immediately impacted by the oil spill. And that's about it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matt Roden, and I'm with the Gulf Restoration Network, the only environmental organization solely focused on the restoration of the Gulf of Mexico. And some of my colleagues have spoken eloquently on lots of different things, so I just want to make a couple of quick points. Number one, as Doug Daigle said before, I think it's really important for us to be looking upstream. If we're really looking at ecosystem restoration, we have to make sure that the water flowing into the Gulf is clean. And that means free or reduced amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution that cause dead zones in our Gulf every year. So if we're looking at where we need to spend money, we also not only do we need to respond by restoring our coastal communities, but also making sure that we're stopping the pollution at the source upstream. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is making sure that one hand of the government knows what the other hand is doing. The prime example I know of this is within the Corps of Engineers and the water quality organizations throughout the Gulf, that the Corps and the states are talking about coastal restoration. At the same time, they continue to grant Section 404 wetland destruction permits, and the states continue to give their 401 certifications for those permits. So at the same time, while we're trying to say, let's restore the Gulf, these agencies in these states are allowing the destruction of the wetlands that we're here saying are so important. So it's just ridiculous to me to see that we're talking about restoring the same areas that we're also granting permits to continue dredging, to do prop washing, which is also dredging of these canals that could be filled in to actually push forward our restoration. People are saying think big, but we should also think small. We should be looking at filling in these oil and gas canals and making sure that we're doing no more harm to the Gulf as we try to restore it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, I'm Ted Falgu. I agree with Denise Reed in the fact that I chair the Governor's Subcommittee on Diversions, and certainly think that we need to think big. If we have big problems, and certainly we need to think on that scale. As a retired port director of Port Flushing for 31 years, I've spent most of my life building transportation, infrastructure, and restoration projects. And certainly, if we don't think on the scale and magnitude of the problem that we have, we will not be able to access our coast. It will be unavailable to us. I also serve as chairman of the LA1 Coalition, so clearly highway infrastructure to the coast is important on my mind. But I'll just leave you with that if we are going to restore the ecosystem, all acres are not created equal, and there are some key infrastructure and access points to the coast that will allow us to access our seafood, access our energy resources, enjoy the fun and sun on the Gulf, and we just need to sustain them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Roy Morrison, the Director of the Office of Sustainability at Southern New Hampshire University. I was here just to listen and to study and not to speak, but after I was hearing the statements this morning, I was compelled to put my name in. George Orwell wrote an essay called Politics in the English Language. I recommend you find it and read it, because this morning I heard Lisa Jackson and Mimi Drew talk about the incident.
If you talked about 9/11 as the incident, if you referred to the Holocaust as the incident, if you referred to World War II as the incident, I'll say something for the person from the FDA. He said the oil spill, it wasn't an incident, it was a catastrophe. And it wasn't, in fact, it wasn't an oil spill, it was a blowout. It was an explosion with enough force that lifted a couple of miles of mud and gas and oil and destroyed the Deepwater Horizon, and then pumped oil under high pressure into the Gulf for a couple of months. That's not an incident, that's a catastrophe. And so my conclusion from listening to when you start to talk about the incident, it's sort of like we're burying it as fast as we can. And I apologize, you're here to take your fair share of abuse. You're good soldiers, you're position takers, you're the chain of bureaucracy that goes on and will keep things under control and normal, But a friend of mine named Charlie King, he wrote a song. I also recommend you try that on iTunes, and it has the verse. They say, they'll swear it's safe, they'll tell us it's true, they say that the risks are acceptable. The question is, acceptable to who? So, no more incidents. Let's talk truth.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Kendra Arneson. I'm a member of Coastal Heritage Society of Louisiana. I'm also the wife of a local commercial fisherman in Venice, Louisiana, South Plaquemines, closest land to the Deepwater Horizon, and I have seen everything over the last 10 months that I thought never would ever exist in my country. Ever. I was a patriot. And the level of distrust in this room alone, you could cut the tension with a knife. We have to gain an open line of dialogue between the task force that's going to be controlling the plan for the restoration and the local community, the citizens. We live here. We want our land to be sustainable. A couple of things. One, the Deepwater Horizon, any other incident before this or catastrophe or whatever you want to call it, we've watched as all of these companies have come in and the fishermen or even our recreational fishermen, a lot of our locals are not considered for the employment opportunity. This could be a positive economic impact on our coastal communities, number one. Number two, as we look for coastal restoration, we would like for the Gulf to repopulate itself. I know you think the seafood is fine because you see all this data. I see data conflicting with that data. So I don't think the seafood's safe. I won't eat it, I won't feed it to my family, and I won't sell it. So we need a better system as far as actually testing the seafood. If we don't do that, then we're not going to be able to move forward in a marketing way. But in order to employ the people on the Gulf Coast and allow not only to rebuild the Gulf Coast physically, but for it to repopulate itself. If we can come up with a plan to engage these fishermen to be able to come work on this coastal project, then maybe if they're not catching the stuff, it'll repopulate. I mean, it's common sense. If they sit there and they're catching and dying the whole time and having reproduction problems and everything that we're already seeing, what are we looking at in 5 to 10 years from now? Are we going to have seafood in the Gulf? I feed my kids. This is how I live. This is serious for me. All these cameras and all these people don't mean nothing to me. My coast does. I came back here 5 years ago and rebuilt from dirt because I want to be here. I want you to help us make it sustainable, but we want to be involved. We don't want what we're doing right here to go into this black hole that it has went into for the last decade. Why have public comment and public engagement if you're not going to take what we say and incorporate it?
Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Biles. I'm the Deputy Director of the Gulf Restoration Network. I'm also on the Board of Advisors for the Gulf Coast Fund, and I sit on the ExCom for the Louisiana Sierra Club chapter. So thank you so much for coming. Forgive me for having a little bit of deja vu. I think sometime a bit ahead of a year ago, we were in a very similar room, although it wasn't as nice. I think it was floor down. And the Restoration Roundtable was meeting to get some feedback about how the administration should be engaged in restoring Louisiana's coast and the areas of Mississippi that were affected by Hurricane Katrina. So I actually understand there's a long-standing commitment to this area, in this region, this coastal restoration initiative, which I think is fantastic. I was a little disappointed when this issue did not get a mention in the State of the Union, because let's not kid ourselves here. This is a political process. You guys are all here for political goodwill. And unless and until we change that status quo, which you start running out of political goodwill very quickly once you do that, we are on a sinking ship here. So the Gulf Restoration Network's been working for 16 years to restore this Gulf. We worked with Brian a number of years there, and we haven't made a lot of headway, I'll be honest. And I think there might be a very real opportunity here to jumpstart the restoration we all think is very important. With a number of reports that say that explicitly, whether it's Governor Mavis's plan or whether it's the Oil Spill Commission plan. But plans and reports that we can all attest to, they just get dusty on the shelves. We need to make sure that what comes out of your hard work is something that can be acted on and that addresses these concerns we've heard. Getting the Corps of Engineers to really think differently, and not just think differently, but act differently, and make sure that the resources that we know are necessary are somehow programmed, and to avoid that very confusing chart that Garrett used earlier, the 40-year process for a Word Up project. So you guys have a big lift, and we want to help you out as much as you can, because this is something we've been committed to for a very long time. But please do listen to the community, because as we're hearing right now, there's not a lot of trust. 2005, you guys remember, there's some storms. There's not a lot of trust that was engendered by the government response at the state, local, or federal level. We put people in toxic FEMA trailers. And I think what you're seeing right now and hearing right now is just an indication that the coastal communities don't trust the government, they don't trust BP. Why would they trust BP? And you guys have a lot of work ahead of you. You're going to build some trust, which, if this is going to be successful, you have to do. So thank you very much.
Reverend Tyrone Edwards from Clapper Parish, Louisiana.
It is very hard for me to come to these kind of gatherings because we keep hearing the word bottom up. But when I have to sit down and look up at this panel and don't see anyone on the panel that represent communities that I live in, what's different about this process? In the 41 years I've been doing this work, I've seen so many blue ribbon panels, but the bottom line come back, you give advice. We're not even, our advice don't make a difference. When the process is going to change, as Patty said, when we can come and see a panel that made up of non-profit, all the government all together, and all of us have equal vote. So I just really hope that we change the process. The other thing that's so important to this whole process, we've seen it after Hurricane Katrina, we've seen it after BP. corporations are getting richer and richer. And the people that are affected are getting poorer and poorer. I think the gentleman from the Corps of Engineers and Ms. Lisa Jackson, I remember y'all was in the lower 9th ward. And I say, I hope then that this president that I love and trust and really continue to support will change the process. So far, I see the same process that I've seen from Bush and all the rest of it. We got to change the process. Right now, we have opportunity. The polluters should pay. But the money should come down to local people and fishermen. There's enough money that's been spent from BP, but it was given to the wrong people. If the local people in our community, our fishermen, and all the people that got half of the money that was given to people from BP, we wouldn't even be in this room arguing right now. So I just hope that we go beyond these window dressing things where community people come up, make these flower speeches and say we heard from all the people, but then they come back to the same thing again. So we have to change this process. And I really believe that everybody on this panel is very sincere in what you're doing. But we got to change the process to make this more mixed. To see, I think the temp is a step in the right direction, but I just think now we still have the opportunity to just mix it up. It would be much better if this panel had a mix of less government people and more nonprofit agency and environmental group than just all federal agencies.
I'd like to thank the task force for their time and their effort today. We appreciate it, I'm sure. My name is Richard Shaw. I'm a professor at LSU. I work in the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Sciences. While you're being challenged to think about both big and small, I'd like to challenge you to think about the long term. And what I mean by the long term is the long-term impacts of renewable and sustainable goods and services that a healthy ecosystem can provide. We're both blessed and cursed in Louisiana. We have the largest amount of coastal wetlands in the country, and yet we have the highest land loss. Why are we so vulnerable in that regard? Well, you heard from 3 speakers this morning that pretty much made a strong case that Louisiana has been subsidizing U.S. commerce and for that matter, even the safety during World War II with the intercoastal waterway. So we've been doing, that's why we find ourselves in this vulnerable situation today, where we're very responsive to environmental insult. So that's how we got there. So when Louisiana loses its coastal wetlands, it loses Louisiana ecosystem goods and services. And these are renewable, these are long-term. They're sustainable if appropriate. These sort of resources are fisheries, ground production, nursery ground production, hurricane and storm surge protection, which helps our coastal infrastructure, our coastal communities, our coastal culture. It even helps with water quality in terms of basically wetlands, coastal wetlands, and Mother Nature's kidney. So we're losing all these goods and services, Louisiana is. And there's a 75 to 100-year environmental IOU that's out there from the U.S. commerce, which Louisiana's been subsidizing. We're in a position to make a down payment on that, maybe. So it's not so much about Louisiana losing very substantial revenues of ecotourism, when our coastal fishermen or recreational fishermen or duck hunters or bird watchers don't come down to Louisiana for a season or two. Those are very real losses, but it's not so much about that. We have real losses associated with the impact on oil and gas and all the repercussions of that, but it's not so much about that. It's about the real tragedy is the environmental and the socio-economic long-term effects, because we're losing these goods and services forever. Forever. I mean, people are dying. I mean, these impacts, so when you're considering your deliberations and coming up with various scenarios, strategies, and you're trying to prioritize, think about it as you'll be conducting environmental triage, because these are real environmental issues, they're real health issues, they're urgent, they're life-threatening. So when you're conducting this triage, think about the state of Louisiana, because we're bleeding to death. And think about it, who's got the long-term losses? The impacts and environmental losses we have are forever. They're not temporary. forever. So just keep that in mind.
I'd like to thank the audience and the participants for yielding sufficient time to allow all of the speakers to present to you. That is the end, and for the task force to give up the time.
Mobile Broadcast News.
Thank you. My name is Denise Reed. I'm at the University of New Orleans. I'm also a coastal resident and have been for 25 years. I have 2 points that I could make long, but I'll try and make them short. One is about process, and the other one is about what I think should be in the strategy. I've worked on a number of plans for coastal Louisiana, many of those probably that Brian's team has been reviewing. And I think we have to learn and think about what's different this time. And the key thing there is think about what's going to be different this time. If we're just rearranging those jigsaw puzzle pieces, then we will get some kind of dysfunctional picture. We really have to think about what we need and how we can move this forward. And so I really urge you to think about processes that can engage us, your people and folks like me that have worked on these processes for a long time, in some kind of dialogue about how we can make this different. Not just me standing at the microphone and you listening, or a listening session, but actually rolling up our sleeves and working together. This is going to be difficult, and we all have to work together on this, and you need the best people you can helping you with this, and many of us will come to the table whether there is funding or not. The second one is about what needs to be in the strategy. This needs to be different. We've got enough plans, you all know that, and I will take my share of the blame for many of those plans, but some of them are different, and they point to the future. That has to be a key element of this. This one needs to be different.
Erin Bentro, I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Danger Conservancy for the Gulf of Mexico. We certainly appreciate you being here today to listen to us. I'd like to just offer 3 things for the task force. First, we encourage you to develop a comprehensive vision and strategy for restoration of the Gulf. While TNC is very engaged and supportive of restoration of Louisiana's coastal wetlands, we're also very aware that these wetlands are an important component of the entire ecosystem, and the entire ecosystem is in need of restoration and conservation efforts, and we believe that we can accomplish more together than acting individually per state. We also encourage that restoration efforts not be limited to oil spill impacts. The Gulf has been in a degraded condition for quite a while, much of that as a result of all the resources it has provided for its nation and state. And we believe it's very much appropriate to start focusing on this area as a priority and make the investments that will allow us to continue to have this resource for generations to come. And also, this strategy needs to be developed at a bottom-up approach or with local expertise and buy-in so that we have a strategy that people endorse and are willing to implement. And TNC stands ready to work with our partners in all of the Gulf states to help build a strategy that will put the Gulf on a more resilient path in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Dr. Denise Reed.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming back again. Many of
talk that was given, you mentioned oil fish, the oil shrimp was put aside. Where did the test results on those oil shrimp? There's no way to find out where those tests were made and when those tests were made. They're not posted anywhere. Corexit, already proven dangerous. Terry Hazen, a consultant to the government and to BP, said before the oil spill that after the Amoco Cadiz spill, where dispersant was not used, the shoreline recovered in 5 years. 20 years after, the shorelines had not recovered where dispersant was used. You all need to do some investigating yourself and not rely on whoever's feeding you this bunch of BS that's being echoed here. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time and for being here. We greatly appreciate it. I'm Casey Calloway. I'm the Director of Mobile Baykeeper. We have over 4,000 members and work statewide and across the Gulf Coast and have been doing so for 14 years. My biggest issue that I want to talk to you about today, one is we really see great places where you've got citizen involvement. You've got a great local government committee. It looks like you have a great NEJAC, the Environmental Justice Committee. What we don't see, though, is a strong, formalized place for citizens to be actively involved. And that is something that we want to see from you, and we raise our hands and sign up, and we'll put whatever we got to do, whatever drive time we've got to do to be there.
This is the one that makes a difference. That's why I've been here all day, because I think this could be the one that makes a difference. And you all being here and coming to these meetings is one of the things that gives me some hope that this one might be different. So what we have to do is think about the big things, not the small, easy things that have probably been done before. The Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection and Restoration Act has been spending about $50 million a year for 20 years on coastal Louisiana. That's $1 billion. And yet we still have the map that Garrett showed this morning. The small things will not make a difference. Do the big things. Lay out a path for the big things. Take what Mr. Salt said this morning about the Corps and Army wanting to think differently about how they do things in the 21st century and use that as a cornerstone. That might not lead to an action that you can see on the ground next year or the year after. But if we can get there in 15 years about doing something different, there has to be a year one. And 2011 has to be year one of the big thing that's going to make a difference in this system. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Denise.
Vice Secretary, a retired engineer and formerly commercial and sports fisherman as well, resident of the French Quarter. First, all this talk about bottom up is absurd when you only can have 1 minute to speak. Second, seafood. The seafood is not proven safe in the.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a public session, public participation. We really only have an hour for this session, so we'd like to get started.
Step on your camera.
I'm going to turn it over to Brian Griffith to moderate this session. He and his staff have put together a procedure. Please come on in. The only thing I will start with is that, as you will hear from Brian, we have 40 people who would like to speak in 60 minutes. Therefore, for the most part, the task force is here to hear public comments, not to give them. So I am going to ask the indulgence of my fellow task force members to try not to respond. I'm not going to make a rule that we will not respond, but I think our goal here should be to listen, certainly more than we speak. Brian, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I am, Madam Chair. Thank you. There are actually 41 respondents to the request to have a time before the task force. Being respectful, it's pretty easy to do the math. We need to keep it down to a very fast minute or so. Like they're doing in the sports arena these days, the fastest 60 seconds in football, we're going to have the fastest 60 seconds in ecosystem restoration. Our first three presenters are Karen Gotro, Denise Reed, and Les Evanchik. I apologize for the pronunciation if I get it wrong. Karen?
Thank you, Brian.